a good old friend, Bob Hiza, with us, and Bob's going to share with us some of his memories. And, Bob, maybe get us started on telling us how you got to Orange.
I came to Orange because the town of Orange was in need of a town engineer, and this was, the year was around 1964. Prior to that, I had worked as a civil engineer on the Connecticut Turnpike, the New York State Thruway, and the Northway, and it required a lot of moving around from place to place as the jobs were completed, and you had to go to a new job. And my wife was really not happy with doing all the moving. So the job as town engineer came along, and I applied for it. Again, this was 1964, and it just so happens I got the job. And my interview, primary interview, among other things, taking tests and all that stuff, was with Bill Knight, William Knight, who was the first selectman. And he was an elderly, very proper gentleman, well-dressed, handsome fellow, probably in his 70s. And he spoke to me for a while and, indicated what was involved with the job and what I would have in the way of any equipment or whatever it might be. And as I can recall, one of the things Mr. Knight said was that you're going to be involved with the public quite a bit, and they're going to be demanding, repair the road in front of my house, fix the drainage problem, do this, do that. And I just want you to remember what I'm going to tell you right now, Robert. Every want isn't a need, and just go by that. According to whatever you do or equipment you buy, every want isn't a need. He was an old Yankee, and that was his philosophy. It was a great philosophy. I've pretty much used it for my whole life, that every want isn't a need, and that is so true. If more of us lived by that, I think the world would be a better place. Anyhow, Mr. Knight came from Vermont, and he was the manager of Fairleigh Farms, which was a huge dairy farm in town here. And after the dairy farm petered out, he became first selectman for a number of years. And I think he was in the state legislature also. But he was a real gentleman, a great boss, and a good way for me to start my career as town engineer in Orange. And Orange is, I'm trying to think about what Orange is famous for, and it's sort of, I guess a lot of us feel that Orange is famous for its agricultural background and cows and that sort of thing. But I think what is more important about Orange is the people that are here. And that's probably true of any town or country or whatever. It's the people. And a few of the memorable people that I can bring to mind, besides Bill Knight, another one is George Smith. George was probably, when I came here, George was probably in his 40s, and he was a jack of all trades. And among other things, he was a farmer. His father was a turkey farmer. He was a farmer. He also provided a lawn service, mowing lawns for people. He was the fire marshal. He was, what else was he? He drove a school bus. He was also a zoning enforcement officer, and a volunteer fireman. I mean, that's like 6 or 7 jobs that he had. And he did them all, did a good job, never complained. Oh, he was also a supernumerary. And if you don't know what a supernumerary is, that's a part-time policeman. So that on weekends when things were busy for one reason or another, he'd put on his uniform and go out and be a policeman. So anyhow, that's my story about George Smith, and he was just a typical, wonderful Orange resident. I guess he had been here all his life. Wonderful guy, and he was not very demanding or complaining about all the jobs that he had. He just did them all, did them well. And that's the story about George Smith. I probably should have stories about half the people in town, and they were all, good people. Times were different back then, of course, and there's been plenty of progress. Another memorable person in Orange goes back beyond to George Smith. Carl Peterson. He goes back to the 40s and early 50s, I guess. Carl Peterson was the chief of police. He was also the building inspector and zoning enforcement officer and any other jobs that had to be done in town. What was remembered about Carl Peterson, and at least I remember, I wasn't here during the time he was here, but in the 40s and 50s there was no Connecticut Turnpike. The main north-south highway was the post road, Route 1. Route 1 went through Orange, and Carl Peterson sort of kept track of a lot of heavy trailer trucks that went through Orange on the way north or south, and somehow he got the idea that too many of them were overweight, and that and I guess there was a weight limit on trucks for driving on state highways through the town of Orange or any town along the eastern seaboard. And Carl Peterson talked the Board of Selectmen to put in a truck scale, in back of the police station on the post road, so that any trucks either going north or south on the post road through Orange would often be weighed. And if they were overweight, the trucking company or the trucking firm or the driver or whoever it was would either have to unload some of his products on the truck, or pay a fine, or both, and Orange sort of became country famous for being the traffic stop, and everybody made sure their trucks didn't exceed the load limit and wouldn't be stopped. So that was a second personality that was a resident of Orange years ago, and that's probably the third. The first person I spoke of was Bill Knight, and as first selectman. A third personality that is memorable, and I still think highly of, always will, was Tom Wright, T.M. Wright. And he had a small construction company, and they got started in the 50s when the building boom had started in town. Up until 1950, much of Orange was dairy farms. And after World War II, the veterans all came back, and they needed housing. They didn't want to live in New Haven. They wanted to move out into the suburbs. And there was an explosion of houses being built. And Tommy Wright, he lived on a farm, and he decided that decided he didn't want to be a farmer, I'm guessing, and he bought a couple of trucks and a backhoe and went into the construction business, and he did quite a bit of work for me as town engineer, putting in drains, and he was just salt of the earth, just a very nice person, and a great person to be with and be involved with. So I guess that's the third or fourth, and there are many more, but these are a few that come to mind. And the Hines were a Orange family going back to when they acquired the land from the Indians, and the Sperrys, and there was another fellow, Kurt Sperry was the dog warden. And the dog wardens back in those days they were real dog wardens, and they took care of stray dogs, and that's all I'll say. That's all I'll say. And that's sort of it for some of the most memorable people in Orange here that I first came across as town engineer. And Judy, if there are any other questions that you might prompt me on, why?
Sure. Bob, how long did you stay on with the town? Because you were there for many, many years. With
I was here from 1964 to 1993 when I retired, which was, 29 years, something like that. And then I had to retire to care for my wife, and I retired for, I think it was 25 years. And who was Jim Zioli, who incidentally, Jim Zioli was the first selectman at the time, and Jim Zioli was in my wife's Cub Scout pack. And then all of a sudden he calls me up and he says, "Oh, we have to hire another town engineer. I'd like to hire you back." And here he is, one of my Cub Scouts 50 years ago, and all of a sudden he's my boss. So I did come back to work for the town for 4 years. And that I was, when they hired me, I think I was 80. And I worked until I was 84 or 85, something like that, and then retired again 4 or 5 years ago. So that's sort of my story as to, how I started here and where I am now, living on Old Tavern Road, but living in the same house for 55, something like 55 or 60 years. And the second owner. Love the house, love the town, great town, good people, everything about it was great. And the growth from when I started in '64 up until the date now was been phenomenal. I don't know, there's the development was partially industrial and commercial development. The rest of it was residential. It was a very desirable residential town, and it involved the construction of many, many miles of residential roads and 1 and 2 acre lots and big houses, and just a nice town for me to grow up in, me to be town engineer, my family to grow up in, and everybody that moved here loved Orange. And during the time of the residential growth, there was also a lot of growth on the post road and south of the post road. The town fathers back in the 30s, probably 1935, I think it was, enacted zoning, and very strict zoning, and a majority of the town was zoned residential, and the area south of the post road and south of the post road was commercial, industrial, and it was a good mix, but the two different zones were kept separated, and the area south of the post road. As a matter of fact, the whole town was pretty much it seems though the town always had a town planner who made sure that any changes in the zoning regulations were proper and fit in with the intended growth of the town, and I think it all grew very nicely. There are some issues and problems with it now that I'd rather not go into, but I think anybody that's watching this probably is aware of it, and I'm sure it will be eventually worked out. And a lot of the work that I was doing involved the straightening out and repair of the roads that were originally town roads. Many of the subdivision, all of the subdivision roads, when they were built, they were built, to town construction specifications, and were fairly well built. They had drainage installed. Should I be looking at the camera or looking at
You're
you
doing
people?
great. You're doing
Whatever.
great.
It's okay?
Yeah.
No.
You can look at, I think of either like Judy, or if you're looking at
I'm looking at the ceiling and the lights are blinding me, so.
Yeah.
No.
All right, I'll just keep talking. You
But I
can.
think, Bob, go back to the roads. That's interesting because back in the day, a lot of the roads in town were basically the driveways from the farms.
Oh yeah.
There were roadways, I know. In fact, our farm, the road in front of our house, basically the town took over.
Right.
And they took it over at that point just by kind of paving it and taking care of it.
Right. Right.
And as you said, the new roads had certain specifications that they had to follow.
Right.
So that's always been interesting when you see some of these roads around town. You think, gee, they look a little more narrow, or
Right,
whatever. And
All right. Let me see if I can start afresh for. Part of my job as town engineer was to sort of inventory all the roads that were existing in town. Many of the new roads that were built for subdivisions, when the acreage was being carved up into 1 acre or 2 acre building lots, the roads were built to certain specifications. The existing town roads were I guess what they called farm to town roads, to bring the produce and milk and whatever else they had to bring into town, and were nothing more than driveways and a cow path. The old Tavern Road was just a narrow road. It was widened, it was oiled and sanded, and just sort of evolved, never very well built for the traffic that was generated by the hundreds and thousands of new houses. So building roads was right up my alley. I'd been building roads like the Connecticut Turnpike, so rebuilding Old Tavern Road was really not a big deal, and it was good fun. It involved negotiating with adjacent property owners for a little more property to widen the road. It was just a great job, get to know many of the people, and I had the time of my life. It was sort of a career that I wanted when I was a little kid. I lived in Fairfield, Connecticut, and the town engineer in Fairfield, they were putting in new sewers on our street. And I was watching them. I was probably 12 or 14 years old. I said, gee, what a good job that would be. That would be fun to be doing. Outside working and digging in the dirt and all that sort of stuff. And So in effect, I achieved my career objective from when I was 15 or 16 years old, and it's just been great, and it's been a great town to work in, and I'm sort of at the moment running out of things to think of. So
Well, I'm gonna interject a thing.
okay.
Since
So
we are celebrating.
Judy is talking up, and she's gonna.
Well, on the celebration that we're doing this for the 200th, 50 years ago.
Oh, Judy, speak up a little more.
50 years ago, you were involved
Oh, okay.
in the 150th,
All right,
and you went for a ride.
Okay, all right, yeah. And it was in 1972. 1972. I had only been in town 64 to 72, 6 or 7 years, and I forgot whether Bill Knight. I think Ralph Capsalotro, another great first selectman. They're all great first selectmen, just so I don't get in trouble with all the other first selectmen that are still around. Anyhow, I think it was pretty sure it was Ralph Capsalotro. Mm-hmm. Bill Knight had retired, and someone approached the town. A company approached the town, and they said, "Your sesquicentennial is coming up." And I said, "What the hell's a sesquicentennial?" And they said, it's the town's 150th birthday, and you guys should do something. And this company, of course, wanted to sell all their doodads as part and sort of manage this sesquicentennial. And Ralph Capsalotro, he said, at first he was a bit reluctant, and then he realized that, hey, this is going to put me on the front page of a lot of papers. This is hot stuff. And we went full blast with the sesquicentennial. There was a committee put together, and the chairman of the committee was appointed by Capsalotro, was Fred Lutz. And just as a little bit of an aside, as a town engineer or any town official, you probably get involved with a lot of committees, and working with committees was never easy. And everybody had their own idea, and there was an old saying that a committee started out to design a horse, and they wound up with a camel. That's what you get when you work with a committee, and that's so true. Everybody has their own idea on what should be. So working with committees was always difficult, but the Sesquicentennial Committee, for some reason, was a great group to work with. And there was probably 12 or 14 people in the committee, and I just a few months ago looked at the picture of the committee, and is Diane Duart, yeah, and Bob Hiza are the only two in the picture that are still left, and I'm taking my pills to make sure I'm still with us here, and I think I'm still with us, and I had breakfast this morning, and I'm going to have my glass of wine this evening, so I'm still moving along okay. But anyhow, getting back to the sesquicentennial, that was, as I mentioned, I only been with the town for 6 years, and was sort of in charge of it, doing the physical things, setting up the fairgrounds, and the highway department was putting up snow fence and fencing off areas and bleachers, and so the whole and part of the sesquicentennial was on the town green. A part was at High Plains Community Center that Capsalotro had just sort of opened up and mowed the lawns, and it just got to be a beautiful spot. And incidentally, it was where they had a fair like 100 years ago. So it was not only 150th anniversary of the town, but it was sort of the 100th anniversary of reestablishing a fair at the fairgrounds. So, am I talking too much?
Well, there was a hot air balloon involved. A hot
Sorry?
air balloon, do you remember?
Oh, hot, you know, as part of this group that came in with all their products and equipment and doodads and flags and banners and, you know, stuff that they were selling, there was of the committees, I was on the special events committee, and that involved, what did it involve? Soapbox derbies and a horse show and you know, animals, sort of a how can I describe it?
We had animal parades.
You know, it was actually the beginning of what became the country fair. There was animals displayed. You know, it was like an old time fair, and they had Ferris wheels and all the stuff for a carnival. One of the events was a hot air balloon, and you had to buy tickets to go up in a hot air balloon. And this was back 50 years ago, when hot air balloons weren't that you know, seen that often, and brought in a hot air balloon and gave rides, and the balloon was tethered, so they blow hot air into the balloon. The people would go up and for a ride about a couple of 100 feet, and get a beautiful view of the town in the hot air balloon, and then they'd get cranked back down, and they'd put 4 or 5 people in the basket again. The hot air balloon would go up, and they'd, you know, get a beautiful view, and it was a way of making a little bit of money to pay for the hot air balloon. So then, about the 3rd or 4th day of having the hot air balloon here, Howard Treat, who was sort of my partner for this event, got here early in the morning, and it was when there was no wind. It was dead calm, and the company that brought the balloon here, we got to be pretty good friends with them, and they said, "Hey, would you guys like to go for a ride?" And Howard and I said, "Oh, hell yes." He said, "Well, we'll cut you loose, and we've got a chase car that'll follow you." And I said, "Heck yes." This is like 7 o'clock in the morning, and we figured we'd have the balloon back by, you know, 10 o'clock. Thank you. Is that vodka? No.
They give you your own
Oh, that's a
special
help.
ride.
We figured we'd have the balloon back by, you know, 10 and 11 o'clock by the time everything got started again. So they cut us loose, and the wind, it was a gentle wind, you know, it wasn't a gale blowing or anything, a gentle wind blowing toward, sort of blowing toward New Haven, Quinnipiac College, in that direction. And and the chase car was, you know, following all the roads to make sure we didn't get away from or get into trouble somewhere. I think we went over Yale Bowl, you know, looking down, and there wasn't anybody too much around Yale Bowl at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it was the most fantastic ride to be riding over Orange. You know, we were up probably 300 or 400 feet maybe. And early in the morning, the thing I remember was that how many dogs there were in Orange, and they'd be out in the backyard, and they'd see this balloon, and the balloon would make a noise when they had a propane burner in order to keep the balloon aloft. You had to blow hot air up there, and that's what kept the balloon in the air. Every time you gave it a shot of hot air, it'd go shh, make a big noise. And people down below would be looking around wondering what the noise was. We'd be looking, waving, good morning, good morning. And the dogs would be going crazy, chasing the balloon, barking. It was just an unbelievable event. And went over Yale Bowl, and we came down in a section of New Haven, up beyond Yale Bowl. I have no idea where it was, and decided, okay, we better come down before we go any further. We've got to get back. And when we came down, kids came running out, and they got such a big kick out of the balloon, wondering where we came from, who we were. It was just delightful. You know, we wanted to give them a ride, but we had to get back, and there was questions of liability and all the rest of that. So we deflated the balloon and brought it back, and
Great memories.
that was an adventure that Howard and I, you know, remembered and shared for a long time. And Howard just died, a couple of years ago, I guess. So anyhow,
Well, that's
yeah,
great.
and then we had one of the other events was a soapbox derby, and what we did was, in order to make it reasonably fair, we got a bunch of dads together that were interested. You know, a lot of the kids had go-karts in the backyard and mini bikes and stuff like that, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted to do something like just a soapbox derby, a downhill gravity type race. And we bought a bunch of sets of wheels and axles and drew up some plans for the specifications for the soapbox derby. And there was a hill over on North Greenbrier that was, you know, straight, steep hill. And there must have been probably 20 kids that were involved in the soapbox derby.
That's a big hill.
And if you watch the movie for the Bicentennial,
Yes.
you could see it, and the dads are all so great. It was so fun. And of course I had a soapbox, helped kids build a soapbox derby. And
You had two. You had two children that were in
oh,
it.
no,
Chris and Dan, I think.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, no, I think it was three. There was three boys that raced.
Three?
We had a
Excellent.
total of 4 boys, but the little guy was too small. Anyhow, that was you know, it was a great time. The whole Bicentennial lasted a week. It was a great time. And the town was so close together, and seems as though it was much more friendly then. Maybe it's just I'm old and grumpy now, and just totally different. I guess, you know, the young folks in town are still having their great time doing whatever they're doing with Little League. And I'm trying to think of, I should have made more notes.
Bob, this was delightful. You really shared with us some wonderful memories, especially of some wonderful people that really were important to Orange.
Yeah.
And I do think that your adventure off in that hot air balloon, I bet those children probably down in New Haven thought you were arriving from Oz.
Yeah, right.
But thanks so much for your time today.
Is
Really.
that it?
Yeah, that
Okay,
well,
I'm going
unless
for
unless
another-
you're serving lunch.
Huh? You mean I've run out of time? You've run out of money on this?
Oh, I
committee?
think this was
Okay,
great.
all right.
This was great.
Yeah,
but thank you
I'm
so
running out of
much.
vodka anyhow. So.
Excellent. Very nice. Thank you so much.
Oh, this is fun.
You were super.
Thank you. Thank
My
you.
gosh. We're going to put you on TV.